Oh, I hit the button early. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, everybody. You know, the Astroimaging channel is not just a means of presenting some of the newest ideas and information in astroimaging. Here you can watch the presentations on a regular, pre-announced basis, and unlike all the other places, you can ask questions interactively. But it's more than that. It's our family. It's a club of people meeting in your living room every Sunday night or maybe Monday morning or wherever you turn in. It takes people to run it. It takes an organization to pull it off. And these interrelationships must be recognized now and then. We all have different dynamics in our families. When I was growing up in my family of 6 kids and a mommy and a daddy and uncles and aunts and grandpas and grandmas, we had occasional little meetings to find out where we were going on vacations or what jobs needed to be done. This little anniversary meeting for the Astroimaging channel helps to do that every year. It's kind of a time to review and talk a little bit about the future. It's not going to be the whole show tonight. After I finish, Tim is going to spend quite some time telling you about Photometric Mosaic planning script in PixInsight. And then I'm going to come back and try a new thing we're trying with videos, making a tutorial. Mine's going to be about Backfocus this time. But let's get into it here. Here we see the viewership of the channel over the 8 years and over the past year. We're up to 1,274,000 views in the 8 years. This year's 211,000 views is a 5% increase over last year's 200,000. We had about 315.8 million viewers in that watch time. That's 13,000 days, 36 years of eyeballs looking at our videos. 53.7 hours of viewing is up this year, 13% over last year's 47.6 thousand. And our increase of 2,000 subscribers is about the same as last year's increase. By the way, don't forget to click on the subscribe button down there if you have not already. Bump us over the 13,000. We did 33% better in our gender status. Yep, last year's was 0.3% female audience, and now it's swelled to 0.4%. Yeah, that's technically an improvement, 1/3, but we still have work to do. Last year, we only had 4 women present, while the year before we had 8. We need more of you to volunteer. As far as age distribution, unfortunately, our demographics have gotten a little older compared to last year. About half our viewers come from the USA. The rest were distributed around the world, some 46 countries. 3 shows this year proved to be highly popular. Check out this graph of the number of people watching in purple and the hours that they watched in green. Dave Payne and Mike Cranfield had the year's single highest audience last Sunday night with their generalized hyperbolic stretch for PixInsight. And although they were only the 10th most watched show of the year in hours, consider that they piled up those hours in less than a week. Queeve, the lazy geek, drew the second highest audience, and Bruce Waddington's PhD program, this drew the most overall views over the last year. And while we're at it, it should be noted that his earlier show, Bruce Waddington from April 2015, was also the second most viewed program on the channel last year. This trend continues throughout all the years. Some of the big shows from the early days continue to get watched because they're comprehensive overviews of the software programs and equipment, and largely because they have a link on the developer's website. They are, in fact, part of the developer's documentation. Now, this page of the milestone report is about the same as the report from last year. Good news is that we seem to be even further ahead on scheduling speakers for you, and it's become even longer since we've had to bounce to an open session because we had nothing planned. We're keeping that promise. We're currently scheduled through the summer, so keep it up. And as you know, finding a volunteer to present to you each week is the hardest part of this job. We're so happy that a number of you are using the form to volunteer. We're also happy that a number of you have supported our viewer participant efforts in the gorgeous galaxies and the TAIC shots. And I will take this opportunity to invite you once again to Participate in these efforts by sending in your shots of Eric's California Nebula and your shots of the center of the Milky Way. These will become part of future programs. Arno and Rory have been spearheading this effort, and they and all the TAIC watchers who turn in their work are what make it happen. Wanda reports continued progress on our effort to get all 400 or so videos annotated for easy reference. She, Andre, and Gowrie have updated everything back to 2018, and they have about 150 more to finish. They could use the help. If you've not tried the database, go to the Program Database tab on the website and click on the appropriate link right down here. You can download the file to your computer or use it live on Google by clicking on the 3 buttons over here and choosing to find. Type in what you want, and you can go from there. We do have some expenses, and we have to think about how we finance what we do. But thanks to the generosity of our viewers, we're keeping solvent and no longer have to rely on individuals just kind of paying things out of their own pocket. Our income has come from outright grants. Yes, that is, viewers simply send us a check or a PayPal donation, no questions asked. We've had several donations of more than a few $100s. They are truly appreciated. We also occasionally get a contribution from viewers who take advantage of the $sign at the bottom of the comment section here during the broadcast. But also contributing to keeping us afloat is the ad placements. I'll confess, I don't think anybody particularly likes having them pop up at random times when we're watching past shows, but they do pay for the service. Our chief ongoing expenses have been the fees for Google and for Weebly. They charge to maintain the website and our Google accounts for our website registration and all that such stuff. But we've had some very expensive software additions. When we got tired of using unreliable shareware that we had been using for years to stream, we moved to a new suite of streaming software that cost $600 an operator, and we needed 3 operators. That took a chunk of funds, but it made the programming better. Oh, and since we're talking about financing this operation, you may be wondering about the swag. Well, I like to think of all of your pretty little faces out there aglow, in the reflection of the monitor screen as you stare at your YouTube on a Sunday night. Each of you, face aglow, proudly sporting a t-shirt with the TAIC logo. It's just darling. Well, the swag is not really contributing too much to our expenses. I get a notice every couple of weeks. I got a couple of weeks ago, I should say, that we had hit 20 sales in 3 years. So there are not too many sweatshirts and tees out there. You can rectify that situation by hitting the button at the bottom of the YouTube screen. And next Sunday night, you'll be there, all aglow in the reflection of your monitor. Now, one of the main reasons for having an anniversary show is to recognize the people who work hard to pull this off every week. As you know, 4 years ago or so, we incorporated as a nonprofit so that the Astroimaging channel would have a life of its own. Regardless of whether one individual or another left the group, we can go on because TAIC is an entity unto itself. This year at our annual meeting, Adam Jaffe, one of our original founders of the channel before incorporation, withdrew from the board itself, leaving Alex, Eric, and Tolga to handle the corporate affairs. For some years, we have been recruiting and empowering individuals to handle different parts of the operation. Eric is particularly important in handling the finances. Tolga keeps us in touch of what is imaging in general. Molly, Terry, and Tim are in charge of getting the program from Google Meets to the YouTube stream. Wanda manages updating the database with the help of Andre and Gowrie. Arno has stepped in to organize the TAIC efforts, the TAIC shot efforts, where we feature viewer images and an occasional video montage set to music. And Rory has busied himself with organizing the workshop shows where he has viewers show how they processed a common data set. He also has been working to get our social media working to spread the word about the channel. We are all supposed to be recruiting interested astroimagers to make presentations to you on all these Sundays. In addition to their individual responsibilities, we keep in pretty close contact by email, by meeting before and after our Sunday shows and discussing what we need to pull this off on a weekly basis. It's not necessarily an organized discussion and certainly nothing hierarchical or formal. But like I said earlier, the family needs to get together now and then, and everybody has to pull some of the weight. And as much as I appreciate them and their individual talents, I have to say that the real thing that is special about each of these people and what got them onto the TAIC team is that they stepped forward. They offered to help, and we had something for them to do. Hit the contact button on the website, hit the contact button, hit the help wanted button, and step forward. We need your help. Most important is that the future of the Astro Imaging channel depends on the viewers. In order to keep this thing going, we need the support from all of you. We've talked about contributing by donations. We've talked about having you offer your expertise by joining the people I mentioned earlier and the various things we need help with. We've not yet talked enough about getting you to volunteer, share your experiences. When I do talk to individuals about presenting, such as I did at AIC a couple of weeks ago, I hear two things repeatedly, and I want to talk to you about them. The first is that people claim they don't have the chops to present. They haven't won an APOD. They haven't invented any processing software. They've not gotten any awards for astro imaging. In short, they go on about how everybody who presents here on the Astro Imaging channel is so much better than they are at imaging. Well, that's just not true. Yes, we have some really good astro imagers among us, and many of them make presentations, but we also have the regulars. We have lots of everyday decent imagers, like I think I am, and even an occasional relative newbie just explaining his or her story. Just because you've not yet won recognition for your imaging from somebody else does not mean you have nothing to share. You're probably your worst enemy in that respect. You may not have perfected astro imaging, but maybe you know how to get the best out of a set of batteries, or you know how to best select targets, or how to print images on paper, or how to build a trailer to tow behind you when you go to a star party to take pictures. Remember, every time you walk into a room of people, there will be somebody in that room smarter than you are, or somebody who knows something you don't know. Now, that's a universal truth, so get used to it. But you still have something to bring to the conversation. I use the John Madden example. He played lineman in college, never played in the NFL, and later became a pretty decent coach. Really, if I were in the backfield trying to run the ball, I would not choose to have John Madden block for me. But I sure would like to have him on the sidelines coaching those who did have to block. In the same way, you can offer something to others, even if you find yourself that you can't pull it off quite as well as you would like. The second objection I get is that everything has already been presented. My first answer is no, it has not. You have something in your brain that you need to share. My second and more important answer is that it's okay to present another show on a similar topic as long as the approach is fresh and from a different perspective. For example, a show on which equipment to buy for astro imaging is a lot different when given by a newbie than when given by a rich man contemplating a full-blown remote observatory. Furthermore, what makes you think that the first guy did it right? Maybe your perspective, the way you do it, is just a little bit better. So think of something. Go to the website, hit that old contact button again, contact us, give us your name. We'll talk to you a little bit about it and consider setting you up on a calendar. Now, a couple of comments about the future. We want to grow the audience and improve the broadcast. As for growing the audience, we're proud that we have nearly 13,000 subscribers. By the way, in getting the show ready, I grabbed this screenshot a couple of days ago with 12.8 thousand. This morning while rehearsing, I checked it and it was 12.9. If you are not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button and maybe we can pop that magic 13K mark. Let's make it clear. Our goal is not to have more subscribers. It's to spread the word about astro imaging. The YouTube metric of the number of subscribers or the number of hits or the number of hours watched is not our goal. The metric is merely a way of seeing that we are meeting the goal of spreading the word. And only in that sense do we want to grow these metrics. Our numbers should be higher because we're spreading the word better. Other people are doing astroimaging videos, and some are reaching more people, judging by their number of subscribers. Those same subscribers should be interested in our stuff. Now, I'm often surprised in talking to astroimagers that they have not heard of the astroimaging channel. But the term often surprised actually describes somebody who's just not learning. If I were as smart as I think I am, after a few such surprises, I would no longer be surprised. But the fact is that there are ways to get the word out about the YouTube channel that we are just not using. I heard an inspiring and enlightening presentation at AIC a couple of weeks ago from Trevor Jones, whose Astro Backyard has something like 28 times as many subscribers as the Astroimaging channel. I was impressed by some of the things he does to make sure people know about his efforts. We simply don't do these things. We need to do some of those things. And one of these things we need to do is improve the broadcast. At our annual meeting of the group last March, we came up with some ideas. Some of these ideas have been implemented. Some await action. You'll see tonight one of the suggestions from that meeting. The idea is many concepts in astroimaging do not need an hour-long show, the kind we usually present. So we should have shorter programs. But we don't want to sacrifice the longer, in-depth programs. What if we had a collection of short tutorials available on the website for those who only need one small topic discussed? To that end, I asked, what were the most common threads in beginning astroimaging? I asked the Cloudy Night Forum that on, April 15th or something. And in the course of a few days, I've got something like 42 suggestions. One of them, to explain Backfocus in 20 minutes, is part of tonight's program. When we get enough of these done, we'll have a separate playlist on our website for those who want shorter, focused lessons. If you want to contribute to the tutorial, yeah, you're right. Hit the contact button. Tell us who you are. Tell us what you want to do a 15 to 20-minute tutorial about. One thing that has continually come up is the actual quality of the screen on our YouTube streaming. Some comment that our stream should always be the highest quality possible, and we completely agree. I mean, we're pushing for sharp, contrasty images of the sky, and our YouTube image is not all that high def. Now, we're not ignoring your comments. We seem to have little control over the rate our internet chooses to run. YouTube and the stream throttles itself without our permission. We also have a restriction imposed by Google Meets. This workhorse of our operations does not broadcast in 1080. It has a top end of 720. So we can never meet that more than 720. Even if we were to tell YouTube to stream a 1080 or higher, and it did without throttling it, it would be streaming a 720 meeting. Now, we've been exploring other platforms for meeting, and we're not wedded to Google Meets. But we have yet to find any platform that allows the kind of interaction we require among the presenters, the TAIC team, and viewers. We are satisfied that the programs we put out are viewable. That is, they look clear enough and get the idea across. The quality of the images cannot match the high-def videos on downloads from AstroBin and things like that, though. And that frustrates us. So we are working on it. You will notice that both growing the audience and improving the broadcast involves getting advice and assistance from others who have worked with YouTube and social media and know its inner algorithms. As smart as Terry, Tim, and Molly are at networking and streaming, none of us in this inner core of TAIC are hardcore YouTubers. But we know there are people who know how to improve both the production values and the spread of the program. We know there are people watching these programs who are masters at Weebly and could improve our website. This stuff is a tad mystifying to me. Analyzing the hits on the YouTube metrics, positioning the channel with tags and all that. Website search engine optimization. I'm simply not a social media mogul. Heck, I'm not even a social media person. I still put my signature on my texts if I send one instead of an email. But some of you people out there have skills we lack. We could use your help and advice to spread the word and to make that word better. So once again, I show you the contact button for the website. Contact us, tell us who you are, and help us get this working better. Go there and pitch in. We'd really appreciate it. With that appeal, one more appeal for volunteers, we conclude our annual review. I hope you've enjoyed peeking into how we operate. And on behalf of the whole crew, I invite you to settle in for Tim's tutorial of the Photometric Mosaic script and mine about Backfocus. And most importantly, be part of our future shows as a viewer, presenter, and contributor. Thank you. Got to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Got to stop sharing. So
That was awesome, Alex. Thanks.
So you can see my, okay, it's my stop sharing. Stop presenting. That's right. See, I got my t-shirt on and I'm glowing in the screen monitor. Okay, thanks everybody. Oh, Tim, are there questions? Do we have to worry about questions today? Eric, wake up.
Nope, there's just
Okay.
Yeah, just a bunch of compliments on our anniversary show and thank yous and thank yous. And
Well, then it's Tim's turn.
Okay, great.
Take over, buddy.
Well, hi, everybody. My name's Tim Hutchison. I presented on the channel before, and you see my mug for about 20 seconds every week before we turn our videos off. Today, I thought I'd talk about the Photometric Mosaic script and how that works. And so let me just bring up my screen here, and we'll get started. So a couple of weeks ago, we had Jose on the show, and he talked about a rather large mosaic that he was doing, and he mentioned that he used the Photometric Mosaic script, and it was almost a perfect lead-in because I had already planned on talking about this tonight. So for those of you that have never heard of this script or the tools that are associated with it, it was created by John Murphy. It's part of PixInsight. It ships with PixInsight. He uses photometry to measure the scale factor of the individual tiles, and he creates surface plines to model the gradient. And it results in a very clean, very smooth, seamless looking mosaic. And we're going to take a look at one tonight here. It can be used for very small mosaics like we're going to do tonight. We're only going to do 2 panels. Excuse me, or you can do very large mosaics with it as well, and large grids. And I've done one as large as 6 panels, but I've seen people do larger mosaics than that. So it certainly can be used for that. Now the way that it works is you start with linear images. I typically crop off any rough edges, and it says in the directions that you can use DBE, or you can leave it out and extract your background gradients later. I always use DBE on the individual tiles, but it says if you have lots of sky background in your images, you can choose to do that after you merge them together. You then use Image Solver on each individual tile to plate solve the individual images. And then you use a script called Mosaic by Coordinates, which we're going to see, to register those images, and it registers them based on that plate solved solution that we get out of Image Solver. So there's no, trying to align with stars or doing anything with the images themselves, except using the plate solved coordinates of the image. We then use Trim Mosaic Tile to crop off any low signal fringes that are, around the edges. And then we use the Photometric Mosaic script to join them together. As I said, you can use it for large ones. If you are going to do a large mosaic, the way that you do it is to join either columns or rows first, and then individual script. So if it was a 9x9, maybe you do 3 rows first, and then you put the individual rows together. So that's how that would work. So let's take a look at it. I'm just going to pull up. Well, wait a minute. Let me do this first. And just to show you what I thought would work with tonight is 2 images that I did not shoot to be part of a mosaic. We have the Hamburger Galaxy NGC 3628, and I have another image, if I can go back here. I have another image that I shot of M65 and 66, and I did not plan on them being a mosaic, and so I thought would stitch those together and come up with a mosaic image. So here's the individual frames. I have L, R, G, and B of the first image, and we'll put those away. And the same thing for the second image. Okay. And I kind of did a bit of the Julia Child's method here. So most of this is pre-cooked, so it's going to go pretty quickly. But as I said in my introduction, the first thing that we do is solve the individual scripts, or the individual tiles, excuse me. And the way that we do that is with the image solver script. And we would simply add the files in here. I have it on list of files, as you see right there. And we're just going to add in the individual files, and I'm just going to navigate to where I have those stored. And I'll just select them all. You give it the coordinates of where, one of the images are near the center. And so if I just put, Leo triplet in here as an example, and we'll just grab the Leo triplet, then I'll put the coordinates in here. I always use the topocentric model. So for that, I give it the longitude and latitude of where my telescope is. The focal distance and pixel size are also important. Oh, didn't have height. I think that's 1450 where we are. And if you're using a topocentric model, under model parameters, you want to make sure that you have ICRS selected. If you're not using topocentric, then you would select GCRS. But in my opinion, the right way to do this is with topocentric and ICRS. And here's the pro tip. This distortion correction is very important. Make sure that you have distortion correction checked, this checkbox right here, turned on. I never had to change any of the individual settings under distortion correction, so I always leave those as at defaults. But if need be, you could select them. The first time that I ran this script, I did it without distortion correction. My stars weren't lining up on the edges, so definitely want to turn that on. We would just hit OK at this point, and it would go off and solve all the individual files. Now, I've already done that. We're not going to have to wait for it. But what results are these files with the WCS coordinates added. Now they look exactly the same. The only difference is there's a plate solve solution included as part of the metadata for each of these images. Okay. So the next thing that we do under Mosaic is we click on the Mosaic by coordinate script. Now, I still got things in there. Okay. Now the way that this works, as I said before, is it takes those plate solve solutions and it mashes all the images together to give us what the outside frame of our mosaic will look like, and then places the individual frames in there, by registration. So the right way to do this is to put all of your frames, from all channels, in this script at one time. So we'll turn those 8 images on that we have for frame 1 and frame 2. We want the WCS images, the plate solved images, to be added in there. I always use gnomic projection and say, okay, go. Again, I've already done this, but as this runs, what it's going to do is register those images and create things that look like this. So here is, and let me just get rid of this so that we can see this a little bit more easily there. Here is the output of Mosaic by coordinates, and it has expanded the frame size to be the size of the entire mosaic and laid each individual tile at the right spot. So you can see how those two are going to line up. Okay. So you do that with all of your tiles at once, and it will lay out the entire mosaic for you. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do, as I said, is trim off any fringe areas. Let me zoom this in a little bit, and we'll see if we can't show this to you. If there's any low signal areas on these fringes where the two are going to join together and we don't take care of that, we'll see a seam. And we don't want to have any seams. So we're going to use this script called Trim Mosaic Tile. Now, in my opinion, this is the one with the most funky user interface. And I'm going to attempt to show you how that works here. But the UI here is a little bit tricky the first time you use it. So I'm going to select the first frame that we're going to work with, which is that L1 registered image that we have right here. And obviously, we want to be real careful about the bottom edge of this image and the right side of this image, because that's what's going to get overlaid onto the others, right? So we want to make sure that we're eliminating any low signal area on the bottom and the right. I always take a little bit off the other edges as well. So if I were setting this up, I would say, well, let's just take 3 pixels off top and left, and we'll start looking at 10 pixels off of the bottom and the right. Now we can preview what that looks like by clicking this real-time preview checkbox right here. And right now I have it set for image outline, so it's going to show me the entire image. And if I scroll the X and Y values to be the bottom and right side of the image, like that, we can see where that bottom right edge is. And we see the white line, that's the outer part of the image. And if I click on preview trimmed image over here, you can see how that's moved back. And so if there is any low signal area out there, which maybe we can see just a couple of pixels worth of fringe, that's all going to be trimmed off nice and neat to give us a seamless mosaic. Okay, so we do that and we click run and it'll trim it for us. And then I'll move on to L2. Now, again, the opposite is true on panel 2. Here, we're concerned about the top and the left side. So this would be different. I would maybe set top to 10 and left to 10 and bottom and right to 2 or 3. And we can do the same thing, preview that. And there's the edge that we're concerned about. And there's the preview after the crop. So we can see how that's, coming in. And if it's not far enough, you just increase the values. You just make it 15 or 20 or whatever it happens to be, right? Or whatever it has to be, rather, to get rid of that fringe area. And we'll run that one. And that's it. So we would do that for all of our images. I'm only going to do these 2. We're just going to join 2 of them together. But we would do that for each individual channel, cropping off any low signal area, excuse me, off of all of those images. So the next and final step to joining these together is to use the Photometric Mosaic script itself. It obviously remembered what I was doing from before, but we would just put in the first panel and the second panel in here. And we can take a look at the stars that it's detecting. If you drop down this star detection section, there's a button here where it has detected stars, and we can click on that and it'll pull up a little preview and show us with these red circles that you see here, all the stars that it's detecting and that it's going to use to join the mosaic up. Excuse me. And in the photometry section, we can also look at a photometry graph of those individual stars. And it will show us the target star flux versus the reference star flux, and see a pretty graph there. So all kind of nifty little stuff to look at, but the real work gets done down below here. The mosaic join section is where you really begin. You can choose to overlay the 2 sections, lay one on top of each other. That's really only appropriate if you're in a really dark site and you have no gradients. Which I am in a really dark sky site, and I typically don't have gradients, but I don't use that anyway. I think I get a better combination if I try to blend them or I try to average them. And typically I see that average usually has the best results, but either of those 2 is fine. You can set the outlier percentage, and you can move that up or down if you choose to. You can look at the section that it's going to use to join, which is what that is right there. You can adjust the scale if you happen to be doing a one-shot color image. You could adjust the scale of the individual channels if you wanted to. I don't have any reason to do that. I'm shooting in mono, but really not much to do there except click run. It'll go out there and do the work, putting these two together. And in a second, we should see our image. There it is. Okay. Now the red that you see there is the mask. It's just got a mask turned on. I'm just going to click exit and we'll get rid of the mask. We don't need to look at that. And you can see, hopefully you can see, I'm just going to zoom up a little bit, that we've got a pretty nice, pretty clean join there between the two images. In fact, let me just do a little better job with the stretch, and maybe we can see that a little better. Oops, come back here. Let's zoom that up a little bit. And maybe we can, there we go. We can see a little bit better what that's actually going to look like, not such a harsh stretch. And you can see that it looks pretty clean. And you also notice that because I didn't shoot these as part of I didn't plan this as part of a mosaic, you can see the areas that were not included. And sometimes these things are more difficult to join when you're trying to use star alignment and things of that nature. So this does a real good job of putting those together, even though it wasn't considered to be a mosaic in the first place. I would then typically crop, and there's a set of crop parameters that I can take off of this guy. And there we have it. I would repeat the same thing, and let's just get rid of this. We can get rid of that mask now. We can move these aside, move this aside, and we would do that again. We would do that for each of the individual channels, red, green, blue, and we would end up with things that look like this. I'm gonna just put him away for a second. We would end up with L, R, G, and B. And then you do what you always do. You combine the RGB to get something that looks like that, and you start playing with it. And in the end, it turned into an image that looked like this. And if we go ahead and zoom this up at the place where they're joined together, I think you can see that this is pretty smooth, pretty clean mosaic. Without a lot of gradients, without any seams, and it's, in my opinion, pretty painless to put that together. So there you go. That's the whole process. Do we have any questions there?
Yeah, there's a question from John. How are different noise backgrounds or graininess variations handled when combining the images?
So what he does is he calculates a surface spline, and I actually have images that I shot in my backyard that aren't as good as this one, where there was some noise in one of the panes and a low signal area in the others, and they weren't really. It wasn't really the best images to join together, and it did a really nice job of smoothly transitioning between each of those panes so that it looked as seamless as it possibly could. So he, as I say, he uses surface splines to try and model the gradient and apply that to the joint mosaic.
So if you have, a 2-panel, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's pretty straightforward. So how long, if you have a 4 or maybe something bigger, how long does it take to put those together?
It's really exactly the same. It's just that you're going to do it more times. So you saw me do 2 panels, right? If I were doing 4, I would create one row like this, and then I would join 2 more together to get a second row, and then I would put those 2 rows together. So for a 2x2 matrix, you're in effect going to run it 3 times. One for one, once for row 2, and then once to put the 2 rows together. So the time involved, aside from the time involved in solving the images, which, if depending on your machine, I don't know how long it takes you to run the image solver. But that's really the only difference, is the computation time to run the images. The joining of the images, putting them together, really just runs lickety split. It's pretty quick.
And I saw that you did your R, G, and B separately.
Yes.
What about doing them from an RGB image?
I'm sure you can, and that's the purpose of having the separate scale factors down here. So I know that you can join them together that way if it is either an OSC image or one that you've already put together. So that functionality does exist. I know that it's there. I've never used it.
And what program did you use to capture the mosaics?
What program did I use to take the images?
Yeah, I think that's a question.
All right. You might also want to know how you scoped out your overlaps.
How I scope. So as I said, in this one, I didn't plan on this one being an overlap, but I can show you what I would do if I were creating a mosaic that had overlaps. There's two different ways to do it. Probably the easiest thing to show you is Telescopius. I use Voyager personally, and Voyager has functionality to do that. But if you use something like Telescopius here, let me just pull this up real quick. Let's go to the same place. Let's go to M65 as an example. And let's say that I wanted to create a mosaic out of these two. Then I can just come here and say I want this to be. I'm not sure which one. No, it goes the other way. I want it to be 1:2, and I can say how much overlap that I want to have here. So it's 10%, or I would actually do around 20, but something like that, and it will lay the individual tiles out for you. And it will give you the individual RA and DEC of each individual pane if you want to do it that way. But as I say, on this particular image that I showed you, I did not plan it to be a mosaic. I had two separate images, and I said, what the heck, let's put them together. I did not plan a mosaic on that one.
There's another question from Chandra Sekhar Nori. Is there a way to use the RA and DEC data already stored in the FITS file instead of doing the plate solve?
I don't believe so. And again, it's more than just RA and DEC, because you want to make sure that you allow it to do, let me pull it back up here, that you allow it to do that distortion correction. So we're concerned with more than just the RA and DEC center. It creates a much larger solution than that. I'd be lying to you if I said I understood everything that it does, because I don't. But I know that it does look at the edges of the image and will correct coordinates for any distortion that's introduced by your system, and will account for that. So it's more than just having the center.
So there's another comment here about using gradient merge mosaic, which I've used in the past before this was out. How do you think that compares?
Well, first of all, I think it's a longer process. But the way that gradient merge mosaic works, and I don't even remember where it is. Whoops, I don't even remember where it is here. I'll do it this way.
I think it's
is that you first have to align. You have to use the star alignment process, which is looking at the image to try and align stars, right? And
you produce a crude mosaic and
correct.
Then map
and
the
then,
individual
and then
frames
match
on it.
exactly. You use star alignment to match those on top of it. And personally, in my opinion, the process of using a solved solution and laying them on top of each other is always going to be more accurate than trying to match up your images. And you saw how easy it was. I was done here in just a couple of minutes. I mean, it's effortless. So I think it's a shorter process. I think it's a faster process, and I think it's a better one.
Any more questions? I don't see anything, Molly.
Nope, I think you got them all.
Okay.
Terrific. Thank you,
Tim.
everybody.
Thanks, Tim, for presenting the tutorial on the photometric mosaic. Sure
You're very
people
welcome.
appreciate it and
Let me,
they can incorporate that. Now we are trying something new here. We've got a tutorial coming up about backfocus, and we're producing it a different way. I'm not actually going to be live saying it. It's a recording of a PowerPoint that I did earlier. Molly, are we ready to go with that?
Yep, ready when you are.
Okay. One thing I wanted to say, I don't remember whether I mentioned next week, we're going to find out about why auto guiding has to die. It has to die. Richard Wright says so, and he's going to be here and explain it to us all. So be here for that. Okay. And we're going to be doing some other stuff. So I didn't go through the calendar this time. Molly, show us the video, see what we got.
All right, here we go.
We're going to talk about backfocus. Google the term and you'll get many different definitions of the term backfocus, and they don't agree with each other. Now, I'm no Webster of Astronomical Dictionary, but I would like to discuss the various uses of the term and especially give you some understanding of how all of these stars on your images can look like this instead of this by paying attention to backfocus. So let's first focus on how a telescope, focuses. Here is the optical configuration of various types of telescopes. They all start with a wide aperture and then bend the light to a crossing point. That converging light is brighter than it was at the aperture. And no matter what type of telescope we have some converging light. That's what focus is. But let's get rid of the eyepiece. For a sensor, the critical issue is whether the sensor is in front of the tip of the triangle or behind the tip of the triangle or right smack on the tip of the triangle. Move the sensor back and forth and you move the image in and out of focus. But what about backfocus? Here we come to one definition of backfocus, the distance from the end of the telescope to the camera. While that sounds simple, you have to ask, where is the end of the telescopes? For refractors, it is generally considered the end of the focuser tube. For Schmidt-Cassis, it's the end of the main tube. This is an important idea for helping you determine just how much stuff you can put in the imaging train. These are all imaging trains. Some extend for just a few millimeters past the end of this telescope or the draw tube. Others go on for nearly 1/3 of a meter. And good Lord, I don't know what kind of images this one would be taking, but the point here is that you have to have enough room so that all that stuff that you want to stick on the back of your tube and still be able to get the sensor to the focal plane. So if you're putting in 175 millimeters of flatteners, off-axis guiders, auxiliary focusers, and whatnot, be sure that you find a telescope that has 175 millimeters of that kind of backfocus. I've heard some people call how far they can move the camera by using the focuser backfocus. I'm not one that would call that concept backfocus, but I would like to talk instead about focuser travel. It's how far one can move the focuser altogether. How far can you move the focuser back and forth? Assuming you can fit everything you need on the focuser tube, you don't need a lot of focuser travel on an imaging scope. After all, the difference between in focus and out of focus is really not that far. However, since you may be changing the filters, focus wheels, or filter wheels, various secondary optics on the back of your telescope tube, it's nice to have lots of room back there. One way you can get more room and be flexible about how you're doing it is to have good focuser travel. But as I said, I don't think I would confuse that with the term backfocus itself. Earlier we used this illustration, but it's not quite accurate. We have a big aperture and the rays of light bending in to form their triangle at a focal point. But you notice we have only two rays here. In fact, there are almost infinitely many. So let's say we've got a image out in space that looks something like this. The magenta rays will be coming straight on through pretty much, get bent a little bit, but they still remain in the middle of the picture. Whereas the cyan up atop will be hitting the aperture at various places, get bent appropriately so that they wind up at the bottom, and the yellow will wind up at the top. So we have a focal plane with an almost infinite number of rays intersecting at various points on that plane. Now, it isn't even quite this simple. It gets a little more complicated because each of these little rays here, life is not perfect. This is what happens with one limitation of our optics called spherical aberration. The rays of light do not actually meet at a single point, but over an area of point. The results is that stars are bigger than they should be. Another imperfection is called coma, and it's particularly a problem in fast Newtonians. The stars appear to be a little bit off-center. They look like this instead of what they should look like. And one of the most frequent with almost any optic is the fact that optics generally have a curved field. It's curved here. This field curvature can be a problem with visual astronomy, but it's not a killer in visual since our eyes have small entry lenses and our brain optical system works together to make it so that we don't notice the problems. But with imaging, it does cause a problem. You see, imaging devices have flat fields. The chips in our cameras are flat, while telescope optics naturally delivered a curved field. So we need something that converts and flattens this curved field, and we call it, sensibly enough, a field flattener. But it's not just optical aberrations that get corrected. There's another thing we may want to do with our objects. Suppose we want to change the focal length of our telescope, particularly in a very long f10 Schmitz cathode range. We want to change the way the light is converging, and instead of letting it converge all the way back here like it normally would, we want it to converge a little bit closer. This makes for a wider field of view on our sensor, and this brightness of the pictures, it brightens the picture somewhat, allowing us to grab the exposures with less exposure time, and it allows us to see more on the chip. To this end, opticians supply us with field flatteners, coma correctors, reducers, and in some cases they design several functions into the same optic, so we get flatteners, reducers. In doing so, they have to assume certain parameters and require that the user implement these standards. One of those parameters that many devices require a specific distance between the end of the device and the sensor itself. Now, not all secondary optics like these have specific distance requirements. Some will work the same no matter what the distance. Others will continue to work but deliver different results. Some focal reducers, for instance, will work at a variety of backfocus distances, but the amount of your reduction you get depends on how far the main sensor is from the reducer. Now this, folks, what I'm talking about now is what I would consider backfocus distance. It's the concept that most of us spend so much of our time talking about. It's the specific number of millimeters between the effective end of the last optic and the sensor itself. It's an optical consideration. Oh, and remember, although we think of the corrector or flattener or whatever as the last optical element, in fact, there is often one other element between it and the sensor, a filter. A filter passes light through a piece of glass. And you can see how the rules are temporarily altered. The light is converging, but then it straightens out for a bit and then continues to converge. And you'll notice that in that time of straightening out, it winds up behind where the focal point would have been had there been no piece of glass there. So you have to correct the stated back focus requirement of your corrector or of your corrector to adjust for the presence of this little piece of glass. Now, it's not much, but it is something to consider. When you insert a filter, increase your specified back focus by 1/3 of the thickness of the glass in the filter. Also, remember that the filter holder itself may or may not add mechanical distance in the optical. Before looking at the how to get the spacing just right, let's look at one other device that we may be putting in our imaging train, a off-axis guider. The off-axis guider puts the guide chip in a relationship to the main sensor such that when you move the focus of the main sensor, you're also moving the focus on the guide chip, so they stay in focus together. In order to do that, the main optic here to the prism to the guide chip has to equal the main optic to the sensor position. And the only way you can get that to happen is if the distance from here, the sensor, to the prism face is exactly the same as from the prism face to the guide chip. So those are the two that have to be matched in order to get that focusing right. Now, it's true that you do have some flexibility, because up here you can move your camera up and down, focusing, as it were, changing this distance. So once you've set this distance approximately right, you can move your other camera, you can move your guide chip camera up and down just a little bit. But beware. A lot of people think that, well, you can just drop the prism down, up and down. But no, that dropping the prism up and down does not usually change the distance from the prism to the guide chip. And it doesn't change the distance from the prism to the main sensor. So you're not changing anything there. Now, there are some off-axis guiders that are made that when you change the depth of the prism, you are also changing the focus position of the camera, of the guide camera. So be aware of that, but generally that's not an issue. One other thing you have to remember is that this is a mechanical requirement, as opposed to what we are calling the optical requirement of the corrector or reducing optic. Furthermore, you can use the thickness of your off-axis guider as part of the mechanical backspacing for correcting the optical backspacing. Your prism, your pickoff prism, does not really affect your corrector or reducer's backfocus spacing, except that the housing of the off-axis guider may move the sensor backward or forward in the imaging train. Now, I just made the distinction between mechanical backfocus requirements of the off-axis guider and the optical background requirement of the correcting add-on optic. They both have their own backfocus requirements. I've seen some posts where Cloudy Nighters ask how they reconcile the different backfocus requirements. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding. There is no need to add the backfocuses together or convolve one with the other. The light waves from the reducer, for instance, do not care whether they are passing through an off-axis guider or a hollow tube. This means that the primary concern when figuring backspacing is getting the optical backfocus right. And using the mechanical backfocus of the off-axis guider or anything else that's in the imaging train is just fine. That's one of the things you could do to help get that spacing correct. The first thing to do is to determine the precise distance you need. You get that from the specifications of the additional optic. This will usually be expressed in something like 55 millimeter plus or minus 1 millimeter, or something like that. Don't forget to adjust for the filter if you may be inserting. And remember, not all optics have specific requirements. The second point is what you need to do is you need to figure out where the distance is measured. Is it measured right here at the top of the threads, at the bottom of the threads, or is it measured from an optic inside? If you're talking about a camera, where is it measured? Where is the sensor on the camera? You have to place all of these things into recognition, and you have to figure all of these things out. The sensor is not at the front of most cameras. It's in fact recesses. If you can't get an illustration of just where it is or a specification, you must measure it. You may find out that sometimes they count the threads and sometimes they don't count the threads. Sometimes it's best to just get your calipers out and confirm everything is going as you think it should be. Measure it very carefully, however. You don't want to be scratching a sensor or an optic. Now you know just how far you need to be from the front of the camera. You have to figure out how you can get there. What can you put between the optic and the camera to fill the gap between the optic and the sensor? Well, there are some things you will need. A filter wheel, perhaps. This has a specific mechanical distance. Perhaps that off-axis guider we talked about. And then just empty rings of the right distance to make it all work together. And finally, some very small spacers that will adjust the last few parts of a millimeter. Remember, the important part is the correcting add-on optic. The Altair 8.8 reducer on Domso's rig and the Skywatcher field flattener on the rig at the Chamberlain Observatory. These are the ones that need to have the correct optical back focus to the sensors to do their proper optical job. Measuring how much each of these devices are physically taking, and then add spacers or move items until you have the spacing right between the end of the optic and the main camera sensor. Now, after you've added your filter wheels, off-axis guiders, and all that, you'll need to add a bit more space. You may need to add a bit more space. You can find spacers on various places on the web, including very thin Delrin washers, which are just part of a millimeter to get things precisely right. Sometimes it can be a bit frustrating. In particular, spacers do not necessarily actually space the way they seem, since they may be measured differently than you thought. It goes back to the old problem of figuring out where you measure from and where you measure to. Sometimes it's best to screw it all together and measure the overall effect of your various devices. Sometimes you cannot get the spacing just right unless you reorder your imaging train. Perhaps putting your off-axis guider before the correcting optic may be a solution. Oh, by the way, these parts really like each other. They fall in love and they get married and they stay together for life. All very romantic and encouraging for us humans, but it's kind of sucky for stupid astronomy parts that may need to be changed from time to time, even after their first assembly. So adjustment can be difficult after a time. I know of no solutions, but I've tried nose oil. Yeah, you rub your nose and you'll find out it's got a little bit of nose oil on it. Trumpeters apparently find that quite useful. There are rubber grips and filter wrenches. None of them work satisfactorily to my taste. Finally, how do you know you've got it right? If you're talking about a field flattener, take a picture, stretch and enlarge it, and look in the corners. Compare the images of the stars in your corners with these two illustrations, which are available all over the web. If your stars are, as in the illustration here, elongated tangentially, your optic and sensors are too far apart. If they're elongated radially, they're too close together. Make your test adjustments by removing or adding spacers. A slight tweak can be made by temporarily unscrewing a filter one turn. When your image looks good, finalize it by inserting or removing sub-millimeter Delrin spaces as necessary so that you have a firm connection in the imaging train. One usually has at least a millimeter of leeway before things become noticeable. Backfocus is important. Unfortunately, the term is used in so many ways that it's hard to pursue proper backfocus unless you have a bit of knowledge of its inner workings. The most critical element for a sharp picture is getting the spacing between the last optic and the sensor correct. Of course, you need proper combination of focuser travel and focuser position so that you can get all the devices like the off-axis guider and the filter wheel attached. The important thing is to think about how all these things interact to get the sensor just where it belongs in relation to the primary optic. And remember, above all, you're not worried about the proper definition of the word backfocus. You are now aware of what the term means. In different contexts, it means different things. All you need to worry about is making sure that the spacing between your optics and the mechanics is just right. no matter what they call it and how they define the words. Now that you've heard what makes sense, just go on out and use your own common sense.
All right, we're back. If you're listening over on YouTube, it's going to be behind Alex. So yeah, put your questions about Backfocus into the chat if you have them. But hopefully that video was elucidating.
Okay. Thank you very much, Molly, for playing. Thank you very much, Molly, for playing that. Don't know if we made the transition properly. Okay, let me see. Do I have to turn this sound off and go back to the meeting sound? And we are for sound. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. I hope everybody's back here together. You can see I'm wearing my TAIC swag. I did happen to check while that video was playing, I did happen to check, and we have precisely the same number of subscribers when I checked as we had the hour before. So please hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Hope you enjoyed the show tonight. I really enjoy working with all these people. They're a very bright and enthusiastic group to work with, and I hope you all join in. And maybe you too, just step forward. That's what these guys did. I mean, they're good guys. They're smart. They're bright. They're active. But mostly they just went ahead and stepped forward. And you can do that too. So please, we got anything else to say, anybody? Okay. Good night, everybody. Take us out, Mom.
All right.